Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from here in Taiwan and the region. I'm Joyce Tseng. The US and China have been locked in fierce competition, and at the center of it is a race for tech supremacy. Semiconductors are a well-covered aspect of this battle, but other innovations, like AI, play a big part in this too. To discuss the geopolitics of technology, I spoke with Jacob Helberg, a commissioner at the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission. He's also a senior policy advisor at Palantir, a software company whose customers range from public health institutes to the US Army. For this interview, we began by zooming in on AI's role in the US-China rivalry. Here is the response from Jacob.
AI is really at the center of that rivalry. If you think about the fact that the last time the world experienced a major global war, that was about 80 years ago. 80 years is the same amount of time that elapsed between the US Civil War and World War II. And just think about how different the world was between those two worlds. Those two wars were completely different. And so I'm convinced that if another global war were to erupt, it would look drastically different than the last one. And I worry that our policymakers are still very focused on conventional methods. One of the things that we're seeing is China is racing to integrate AI at every layer of the kill chain. We're already seeing AI being used for targeting. We're seeing AI being integrated into to create recommendation engines for battlefield decision makers. But it's going to be all-encompassing, and it's going to dramatically change the face of warfare.
With each, the US and China's tech capabilities at the moment, what are you most worried about there?
Well, there's a fundamental trade-off that we're seeing in military AI particularly. There's a trade-off between speed and human control. In democracies, we're very comfortable with humans being in the loop, and we actually want humans to have input on making the final call, pressing the button, when an attack is launched. In autocracies, it's a much lower trust environment. You're seeing that manifest itself when Xi Jinping disappears his foreign minister, when he disappears Hu Jintao, at an annual gathering. It's lower trust, and so they are more likely to bias in favor of more automated decision making. What that means is they are likely to move very fast, but when you automate more things, it also creates a higher degree of risk to make mistakes, because ultimately you're putting machines in control, and that means that you have less oversight. And so right now in peacetime, I think our policymakers are very much skewing in favor of a lot of human oversight, which is completely safe and understandable. I think it's important to have the debate about where we want to land, because ultimately when you are at war, new pressures come in. You have to respond to events in real time. And if you're responding to an adversary that's moving 3 times as fast as you, you're going to be under a lot of pressure to move a lot of things over to automation.
In your work in Washington, what is your most immediate goal in your lobbying for AI?
Yeah, I think we need national security to be a fundamental organizing principle in the debate around AI. I think too much of the AI debate has focused on an abstract concept of safety that has been too disconnected from national security. The reality is we don't live in a silo. We live in a broad world where we have friends and we have adversaries. One of those adversaries is the People's Republic of China that is racing ahead to integrate AI into all of its systems. They are all in, from AI on the software side to on the robotics side. They announced that they want to mass produce humanoids by 2025. And the decisions that we make necessarily have to be based off of what we're seeing them do on the other side, because we have to stay competitive. And so making sure that on the one hand, we have a technology agenda that allows us, and a policy agenda that allows us to move as fast as possible in the development of artificial intelligence to maintain and hopefully expand our lead, while at the same time addressing and closing the loopholes that our adversaries have exploited that have allowed them to get access through back doors to our most sensitive technologies.
I'm curious about where Taiwan fits into this. Obviously, with chips, Taiwan is in this leading position. The US is also trying to court Taiwanese chip makers to American soil. Other East Asian countries, Korea, Japan, are also looped into this US-China rivalry in tech. Could you talk a little bit about how these other countries fit into the picture when you're discussing these issues?
I think two elements that really bind Silicon Valley and Taiwan together in a close way is, on the one hand, I think a lot of people in Silicon Valley who are animated by a passion for free speech and democratic values feel genuinely passionate to stand with Taiwan in its desire to remain free and open. On the other hand, Silicon Valley is a world leader in software, but it lacks the kind of hardware manufacturing capacity that Taiwan has so much expertise in. Silicon Valley can help the Taiwanese government modernize and undertake important efforts to modernize its defenses and think through the role of emerging technologies in defense. By the same token, Taiwan has undertaken a lot of heavy lift already for its own security to think through how can Taiwan have supply chains that are free of CCP components. And then lastly, as you pointed out earlier, there's obviously a great deal of focus on Taiwan's chips ecosystem. It's no secret that in the US, we are absolutely seeing a race in the development of artificial intelligence. Within the US, there's a race between a number of companies, but ultimately there's a broader race between the US and China. And the access to the most advanced chips is the fuel for that race. And so making sure that Taiwan and Silicon Valley work closely together to ensure that American companies have access to the chips that they need in order to move as fast as they can is obviously something that's incredibly important as well.
And if I can, zoom out a little bit here, you said before tech companies can't be neutral anymore. What do you see for the future of tech's role in geopolitics? As you're saying, it's having more of a role to play in policy making, things like that.
Yeah, I think for too long, technology companies have tried to be Switzerland, and what we're seeing is fundamentally the realities of the world are such that they can't be neutral between the US and China. In China, you fundamentally have a civil-military fusion regime that completely erases the distinction between the private and the public sector. And so it's very hard for technologies to comply with two legal systems that are fundamentally at odds and contradict each other. You can't protect personal privacy in America if ultimately you are answerable to the Chinese Communist Party that is predicated on total obedience with the diktats from the CCP, including handing over whatever information the CCP requests. And so I do think we can call it de-risking, we can call it a banana, but fundamentally what we're talking about is decoupling to a certain extent in the technology world, and I think that's a healthy thing. It's a really big world out there, and there's more to this world than just China. There's incredibly exciting opportunities here in Taiwan. There are great opportunities in India and so many different emerging markets. And I hope that our very industrious CEOs in Silicon Valley see that and reach out to so many of these exciting markets that have burgeoning technology ecosystems, an incredibly talented bench of engineers, and seize those opportunities.
Taiwan, with social networks, Taiwan was subject to unprecedented disinformation during, the election. This is also a very important election year just globally and also for the US. Where do you see this trend in terms of weaponizing information going, and what can be done about it?
Part of what we're seeing is gray zone warfare has become a pervasive and defining feature of international politics because new technologies have made it possible for governments to compete and wage political warfare in ways that are highly potent below the conventional threshold of war. It is hard to talk about Chinese election interference and not talk about TikTok. TikTok is completely controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. They control the algorithm. They flood the platform with fake accounts to, fire hose the platform with their propaganda, pro-CCP propaganda. And so ultimately, one of the fundamental dilemmas that I see, elected officials in the US and around the world struggle with on the TikTok issue is everyone knows it's a national security threat. Everyone understands it's totally controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. But they struggle with, are we going to lose a generation of young people if we ban it? Are we losing an ability to reach out to young voters? And what if members of the opposing party use TikTok in a more effective way and they're reaching out to those voters? Here's what I have to say to those elected officials is, if you are an elected official that is concerned about the security of your country, and if you're critical of China, you will not get promoted on TikTok. If you're seeing young people move away from your party, it's not because you're not reaching out to them on TikTok. And so my advice to policymakers is, focus on the long-term national security risks. Your country will be much safer if you take action on this now rather than wait. India did it a few years ago. They're growing at 9%. They're doing great. And I think democracy should do the right thing, should do what's right for their countries and ultimately remove CCP control from TikTok.
China's recent Boao Forum, they're now coming back, reiterating this, China's open to do business. And since APEC, Xi Jinping meeting with all the CEOs in San Francisco, what do you make of this messaging? Does that affect your efforts in Washington? Yeah,
so what I would say is it's very nice that Xi Jinping and his diplomats are having a much softer approach. I think everyone remembers very clearly when all of these Chinese diplomats were playing warrior wolf diplomacy, just 3 years ago, particularly during COVID. And so what I would tell every member of the business community is these diplomats are warrior wolves in sheep's clothing. They, are approaching them and playing nice simply because they need foreign investment to prop up their economy, which is facing substantial headwinds. And ultimately, I think they need to live with the consequences of their policy decisions. I mean, they have waged aggression campaigns against India, against the Philippines, against Taiwan, unprecedented campaign to try to interfere in Taiwan's election, intimidate Taiwanese officials. So ultimately, I would say you're not going to see, if you're a business person trying to make a decision, you're not going to see an easing of tensions between the US and China, regardless of who's president. And so, I would encourage our members of our fantastic business community to look for other opportunities elsewhere in emerging markets like Taiwan, like India, Vietnam, and so many other places.
Thank you so much, Jacob.
Thank you. No, it's great to do this. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
That was Jacob Helberg, Senior Policy Advisor at Palantir and a Commissioner at the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission. And this has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories from TaiwanPlus News, please follow us on social media. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.